During the company dinner, my mind was far from the conversations and toasts, too busy observing the gestures, the looks, the details that went unnoticed by others. So, that happened. The touch. The slide of his fingers across her face. It was subtle, quick, but I saw it. There was no doubt. It wasn't a gesture of courtesy, it wasn't something casual. It was intimate. Family. Known. As if they had already done this before. As if it were something natural between them. My body went rigid. My heart sped up and, for a moment, everything around me seemed to go blank. The laughter of the guests, the noise of glasses clashing, the scattered words about dinner, nothing else existed. Just that scene. Just that gesture. Just the betrayal drawn right in front of me. I stood up, and silence came like a violent wave. All eyes turned to me. My blood boiled. My chest rose and fell rapidly, trying to contain the explosion inside me. But it was impossible. It was too late to hold back. What the hell did I just see? My voice cut through the room like a sharp blade. The boss blinked in surprise, pretending not to understand. My wife's eyes widened, frozen in place. I felt the hesitation in her, the fear on her face. A fear that said much more than any excuse I could come up with. Speak, explain to me. Because I'm here, looking at my boss fondling my wife in front of everyone. Shock dominated the environment. The wine in the glasses seemed to turn sour. The guests' laughter died down. I could feel the weight of judgment, the bated breath of the people around, waiting to see the outcome of this. My wife tried to get closer, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. But that's exactly what I was thinking. There was no other explanation. And I didn't need any more words. We are finished. The announcement was dry, cold, definitive. She held my arm, her eyes shining with desperation, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a defense, an explanation, anything that could stop me from saying those words. But nothing she said would change the fact that, from that moment on, what existed between us was destroyed. The boss cleared his throat, trying to take control of the situation. Calm down, it wasn't like that at all, my gaze went through him like a blade. Nothing like that. I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, a laugh that had all the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in my mind. The strange hours. The cell phone is always facing down. The smell of a perfume I didn't wear. Everything was there all the time, and I, an idiot, blinded by love, didn't want to see it. But now there was no turning back. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it. My voice cut through the air, cold as ice. She tried to hold me back, tried to say something more, but I let go. I left that house with my chest on fire, my head spinning. But within the anger, something began to emerge. A doubt. Something I hadn't considered before. Something that made me stop in the middle of the dark night and question, why my boss? Why him? What did she gain from this? Suddenly it didn't just feel like an emotional betrayal. It didn't feel like just an affair. There was something more. Something hidden behind every touch, every look. Something I hadn't discovered yet. Something that would change everything. And that's why I need to find out the truth. Because maybe, just maybe, the betrayal is much bigger than I imagined. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is neither romanticized nor justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the feelings are real. Our goal is to show how betrayal destroys lives, families and dreams, leaving marks that never heal. Get ready, because what comes next is intense, shocking and unforgettable. Good story. The room was impeccable, lit by imposing chandeliers that cast a golden glow over the elegantly set tables. The walls were decorated with classic paintings, chosen to convey sophistication without appearing excessive. The smell of red wine mixed with the aroma of refined dishes, and the sound of clinking glasses spread throughout the room. That night's dinner was one of the most anticipated events of the year for the company's employees. It was the kind of occasion where everything needed to look perfect. Liam and Sophie had meticulously prepared for this night. He, a man with a firm posture and confident gaze, wore a tailored suit that highlighted his striking presence. Sophie, by her side, exuded elegance in a long black dress, which hugged her body delicately. Her hair was tied up in an elegant bun, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, and her eyes sparkled in the salon's lighting. Together, they looked like the perfect couple, smiling, aligned, a reflection of complicity that many envied. But behind appearances, things were no longer the same as before. They had been married for 8 years. The beginning of the relationship had been intense, passionate. Liam had always been a self-assured man, someone who knew what he wanted and how to achieve his goals. He worked hard, growing in the company by leaps and bounds, always determined to build a stable future for both of them. Sophie, on the other hand, was a charming, sociable woman, someone who brightened up any room she entered. Always charismatic, she had a natural way of winning over the people around her. She had given up her career in advertising to focus on life with Liam, believing that together they could build something great. In the early years, the connection between them was almost magnetic. They laughed easily, spent hours talking about anything, and the desire seemed inexhaustible. But, over time, the routine began to wear down that flame. Liam had become increasingly dedicated to his work, often arriving late, exhausted, without the same energy for the small gestures that used to make Sophie feel special. Romantic dinners began to become sporadic, long conversations were replaced by comfortable silences, or maybe not so comfortable. Sophie tried to ignore the feeling that something inside her was changing. But it was undeniable. The butterflies in my stomach that I felt when Liam got home no longer existed in the same way. The endearing words were said more out of habit than genuine impulse. Still, they remained together, an exemplary couple in the eyes of others. There was respect, admiration, a partnership that seemed solid. But something essential, something invisible to outsiders, had been lost. Sophie still loved Liam, but she missed something she couldn't even name. Liam, in turn, trusted her completely, without ever questioning her loyalty. I believe that, despite the exhausting routine, they were still the same as before. He didn't see the signs, or maybe he didn't want to see them. That night, the dinner represented more than a corporate event. It was Sophie's opportunity to feel part of Liam's world again. Lately, the days seemed empty, monotonous. She missed the excitement, the attention. She missed feeling desired. Not that Liam completely ignored her, but it was different. The quick kisses before leaving for work, the routine hugs before bed, everything seemed mechanical, predictable. I wanted something more. I needed to feel something more. The table they were sitting at was one of the main ones at the event, very close to the evening's host, Nathan, the company's CEO. Nathan was an influential man, known for his charisma and persuasive way of dealing with people. He was someone everyone respected and, at the same time, feared. His gaze was observant, his posture imposing, and his way of conducting conversations made any interaction with him remarkable. Sophie had already been with Liam at other company events and had already spoken to Nathan a few times, but always in a formal manner. That night, however, he seemed more interested in her presence. The toasts began, the formal speeches were made, and the guests relaxed. Liam was immersed in a business conversation with other company executives, talking about future strategies and projections. Sophie, on the other hand, felt out of place at that moment. He observed the expressions around him, the shine of the glasses, the way people moved. It was then that she noticed Nathan's gaze on her. A different, attentive look, as if reading every nuance of your expression. He smiled, a subtle smile, but filled with a meaning that Sophie couldn't immediately interpret. "I hope you're enjoying your evening," Nathan said, leaning slightly towards her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Sophie smiled back politely, but felt a slight shiver. It wasn't discomfort, but something more subtle, almost imperceptible. Yes, it's an impressive event, he replied, trying to keep the conversation within the bounds of formality. Your husband is one of the best executives we have here, Nathan continued, casting a quick glance at Liam, who was still distracted by the other men at the table. It's admirable to see how dedicated he is to his work. Sophie nodded, but there was something in his tone that made her hesitate. Yes, Liam has always been very committed. Nathan smiled again, as if there was more to be said, but not right now. Commitment is essential, in all aspects of life, he commented, without taking his eyes off her. Sophie looked away, focusing on the glass of wine in front of her, but she felt the intensity of that moment. Ambient music filled the spaces between conversations. Sophie tried to push any strange thoughts out of her head, tried to ignore the feeling that something was being insinuated. Maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe it was just the way Nathan interacted with people. But still, something inside her was different. I felt the weight of that look, the intensity of that brief dialogue. Liam finally turned his attention to her, smiling like he always did when he tried to include her in conversations. Are you enjoying the night? He asked, lightly touching his hand on the table. Sophie forced a smile and nodded. Of course, everything looks amazing. But for the first time, her words sounded empty, even to herself. The night followed, and as the hours passed, Sophie found herself lost in thought. Something was about to happen. He didn't know what, he didn't know when, but he could feel it. The only thing he still didn't understand was how it would change his life forever. The company dinner was behind us, but something from that night remained with Sophie. Something that didn't dissipate, even days later. The way Nathan had looked at her, how his voice had sounded full of hidden meanings, how each word seemed loaded with an intention that she couldn't decipher. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, as if he knew something she didn't yet understand. Since that night, his mind had been restless. She tried to ignore it, rationalize it, convince herself that none of it meant anything, but the feeling that something was about to change wouldn't leave her. Liam, in turn, seemed oblivious to everything. He continued his routines, arriving late from work, distracted, immersed in company projects. He trusted her completely. This was something Sophie had always known. He never questioned your schedules, your meetings, your outings. Sophie could leave and come back whenever she wanted, and Liam never asked where she had been. Not because of neglect, but because he had never had any reason to distrust her. They had a stable marriage, without fights, without intense arguments. But also without that flame that once existed. It was on a random afternoon that Sophie received Nathan's message. It was direct, objective. An invitation for a coffee. The pretext was professional, of course. But there was something about the way he phrased the message that made Sophie hesitate before responding. She could ignore it. You could just go on with your day. But he didn't. He responded with a simple, yes, we can meet. The meeting was scheduled for the end of the day, in a discreet cafe, away from the eyes of the company. When she arrived, Nathan was already waiting for her. He was sitting at a more private table, a coffee in front of him, his eyes fixed on her as soon as he entered. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. I knew nothing out of the ordinary should happen there. I knew this was just a conversation. But then why was his heart beating faster? Nathan smiled, standing up to greet her. He always had that imposing presence, a natural confidence that made anyone around him feel small. Sophie sat and waited. It was Nathan who broke the silence first. You seem tense. Sophie laughed, a short, nervous laugh. I'm not. I just didn't expect this invitation. Nathan leaned slightly across the table, his voice low, as if he were telling a secret. I've been watching you for a while, Sophie. You are an intriguing woman. She blinked, not knowing how to respond. I don't think I've ever described myself like that. Nathan smirked. Because maybe no one told you before. But I see. I see what's behind that look of yours. You're bored. Sophie felt a tightness in her chest. Those words hit her more than they should have. Nathan continued, taking his time. You want to feel more. Something you can't find anymore. Sophie looked away, focusing on the cup of coffee in front of her. That's not true. But his voice didn't come out as firm as he wanted. Nathan waited a moment before responding. If it wasn't true, you wouldn't be here now. Sophie stood up. I needed to leave. That conversation was going down a dangerous path. Thanks for the coffee. But before she could take a step, Nathan lightly grabbed her wrist. It wasn't an aggressive touch, but it made Sophie stop. You can go now. Pretend nothing happened. But we both know the seed has already been planted. Sophie pulled her arm and left, without looking back. In the days that followed, he tried to forget that conversation. But I couldn't. It was as if Nathan's every word echoed in her mind, as if he had exposed something that she herself avoided seeing. Liam was still oblivious, as always. Their conversations were limited to the basics, to everyday matters. Sophie tried not to think, but at night, when she lay in bed next to her husband, her body seemed restless, her mind racing. And then, she started responding to Nathan's messages. At first, they were trivial conversations. Comments about work, casual exchanges of words. But they soon moved on to something more. Nathan knew exactly what to say. He knew how to instigate, how to provoke without being obvious. Sophie didn't just see him as an attractive man, but someone who made her feel alive. Each message heightened anticipation, created an invisible connection she knew shouldn't exist. But it didn't stop. The first meeting outside the cafe took place a few weeks later. A dinner, under the excuse of a professional matter. Sophie knew it was a trap, but she accepted it. She wanted to be there. She wanted to feel whatever was growing inside her. The wine made things easier. The words flowed more lightly, the looks lingered longer than necessary. And when Nathan touched her hand to the table, Sophie didn't flinch. That night, she crossed the line. And there was no turning back. They were hidden meetings, stolen moments between free schedules and well-constructed pretexts. Sophie became more careful, more discreet. But at the same time, I couldn't help the butterflies in my stomach that I felt every time I was with Nathan. He was different from Liam. More intense, more unpredictable. The way he touched her, the way he looked at her, made Sophie feel like she hadn't felt in a long time. Liam didn't suspect anything. He continued with his routine, believing that his marriage was safe. Sophie, on the other hand, knew she was risking everything. But I couldn't stop. The desire, the adrenaline, the danger, it was all part of a game that she could no longer get out of. And then came dinner at Nathan's house. A small event, with few guests, only the most influential people in the company. Sophie was hesitant to accept, but Nathan insisted. It will be discreet. Nothing compromising. She knew it was a mistake. But she was already too deep to retreat. That night, everything changed. Nathan's house was stately, modern, every detail carefully planned. The atmosphere was refined, the guests talked in low tones, the music in the background created an intimate atmosphere. Sophie tried to act natural. He tried to behave as if nothing was happening. But then, Nathan approached. Not obviously, but enough that Sophie felt the electricity in the air. It was a simple gesture. A subtle touch on her face, a slide of fingers that lasted less than a second. But that was enough for Liam to see. Liam's gaze froze. The world around him seemed to go silent. Nathan walked away, but it was too late. Liam stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on Sophie. She realized at that moment. He realized that that touch, that moment, was the end of everything. And then, Liam spoke. The silence was broken. And nothing would be the same again. The silence that followed Liam's outburst seemed to suffocate the air around him. His gaze was fixed on Sophie, the veins in his temples pulsing with the force of pent-up anger. Nathan remained motionless, without showing any sign of surprise, just observing, as if he had already expected that reaction. Sophie felt the weight of every look on her, every second that passed carried with it the certainty that everything she had built was crumbling before her eyes. He tried to open his mouth, tried to justify, but nothing came out. There was no possible defense for something that was open in front of everyone. Liam clenched his fists, breathing heavily, fighting to maintain control over the fury burning in his chest. "Tell me what this is. Now." His voice was hoarse, filled with disbelief. Sophie tried to get closer, but he took a step back, as if her touch was something that disgusted him. "It's nothing, Liam. You're taking it in the worst way." Her attempt to minimize the situation only inflamed his gaze even more. Nathan, without losing his posture, just smiled discreetly and took a sip of wine, as if it were all just another predictable scene in his life. The guests looked at each other, unsure how to react. Some looked away, trying to avoid embarrassment, while others remained attentive, eager to witness whatever came next. Liam didn't blink, his eyes brimmed with a mixture of pain and fury. "So you think I'm stupid?" His voice cut through the air, his breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of the moment. "I saw it, Sophie. I saw everything. The way he touches you, the way you react. Do you think I don't understand?" Sophie swallowed. His body was shaking, but he didn't know if it was from guilt, fear or the certainty that there was no going back. She looked at Nathan, looking for some reaction, some word that would bring a way out of that situation, but he just watched her, as if he was curious to see where this would go. Liam took a deep breath, trying to regain his calm. But it was impossible. The betrayal was there, raw, irrefutable. The months of him ignoring the signs were now coming back with a vengeance. The messages she received and never mentioned, the excuses for being in places where he wasn't, the way her gaze seemed distant when he tried to get closer. Now everything made sense. And the worst thing of all was that this wasn't just any case. It wasn't a banal betrayal. It was with Nathan. Your boss. The man who was directly linked to his work, his livelihood, his professional life. But there was something wrong. Something beyond betrayal. Liam felt a bitter taste in his mouth, a feeling that went beyond the pain of being deceived. Why Nathan? Why is he fair? The answer was there, lurking, waiting to be said. But Liam still didn't see her. I still didn't see the size of the game I was involved in. And then, Nathan broke the silence. I think it's time we stop this theater, don't you? His voice was calm, as if he had been in control from the beginning. Sophie turned to him, confused, trying to understand what he was about to say. Liam narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Nathan smiled, throwing the napkin on the table, as if that moment was just a formality that he had planned a long time ago. I knew this moment would come. And to be honest, I'm surprised it took this long. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Nathan didn't look bothered, didn't look like a man who had been caught in an extramarital affair. He seemed like someone who had everything under control. Liam stepped forward, his gaze burning with fury. Do you have the courage to speak like that after what you did? Nathan raised an eyebrow, as if mildly amused by the other man's intensity. After what I did? My dear Liam, I only did what any man would do when he sees an opportunity. And opportunities need to be taken advantage of. Sophie's stomach dropped. She felt that something much worse was coming. Something she didn't foresee. Something she should have realized before getting involved. Liam narrowed his eyes, starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. What do you mean by that? Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Do you really think this betrayal started out of desire, out of passion? Do you think it was just a slip, a moment of weakness? Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. Nathan, stop it. But he ignored it. That wasn't a mistake, Liam. That was a move. A well-planned piece on a board you never realized was being manipulated. Nathan paused, letting the words sink in. Sophie didn't choose this. I chose. I needed a reason to destroy you, and she was the perfect key. Liam felt like the ground was opening up beneath his feet. He blinked, unable to immediately process what he had just heard. Sophie covered her mouth with her hands, the shock on her face was evident. Nathan continued. I knew you were a threat. It always was. You grew up too quickly in the company, you attracted too much attention. But every man has a weak point. And I found yours. His eyes sparkled with amusement. I created the perfect circumstances. I was patient. A compliment here, a look there. Sophie was needy, vulnerable. All it took was a little push. Liam clenched his fists tightly, reality crashing down on him with a crushing weight. So, was this all a plan? Did you use my wife to destroy me? Nathan let out a low laugh. Don't be naive. I didn't use anyone. I just showed her something you haven't shown her in a long time. She made her choices. But now, what's left for you? Liam's world was spinning. The man who destroyed his marriage didn't do it just out of desire. He did it out of strategy. And Sophie, without even realizing it, had been a pawn in that game. Sophie felt tears burning her eyes. I didn't know that. Nathan, but his voice trailed off. Now it was too late. Liam let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. So that's it. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost everything. Nathan just smiled. Yes. And you didn't even see it coming. Liam felt his chest tighten, his breathing heavy. Everything he knew, everything he built, had been ripped away in a single night. But it wouldn't end there. He hadn't played his last card yet. And in that moment, he knew. Nathan would think he won. But he was wrong. Liam remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Nathan, feeling hatred grow inside him like an uncontrollable fire. Every word that came out of that man's mouth was a sharp blow, a stab at his dignity, at his life, at what he believed to be a solid marriage. Sophie, next to her, looked lost, as if her mind was still trying to process everything she had just heard. But Liam didn't need any more time. The truth was there, naked and raw. Nathan didn't just destroy his marriage, he engineered it all, used Sophie as a pawn to break it up, and what's worse, she fell into the trap without realizing it. The silence that followed was heavy. Dinner continued, but everyone's attention was focused on that scene. Some disguised themselves, pretended they weren't listening, while others, more attentive, absorbed every detail of that war about to explode. Liam took a deep breath, trying to control his breathing. His heart was racing, his thoughts were confused, but one thing was clear, he wouldn't let Nathan emerge as the winner of this story. Sophie broke the silence first. His voice was hesitant, but full of guilt. Liam, I never imagined it would be like this. I swear. I thought, her voice trailed off, and she lowered her eyes, unable to meet her husband's gaze. He laughed, a bitter, painful laugh. What did you think, Sophie? That he loved you? What was it about desire? That this was all a coincidence? My God, how could you be so blind? Nathan crossed his arms, a discreet smile on his face, as if he was just watching the outcome of a plot he wrote himself. Don't be so hard on her, Liam. She just wanted to feel alive again. You, of all people, should know how ignored she felt. Liam gave him a lethal look. You really like playing with people's lives, don't you? Nathan lifted his shoulders, without any remorse. It's not a game if you know exactly what the outcome will be. Liam's blood boiled. His desire was to punch him, to end that smug smile, to destroy that man in the same way he had destroyed his life. But he controlled himself. Hitting Nathan wouldn't get him anywhere. It wouldn't fix what was already broken. He needed to get out of there, he needed to think, he needed to understand how he was going to start over after all that. He turned to Sophie. Do you want to know the worst of all this? It's not the fact that you cheated on me. It's not the fact that you gave yourself to him. It's the fact that even now, after everything, you still don't realize how much you were used. How disposable it was. How much it never meant anything to him. Sophie trembled. Her hands were sweating cold, her eyes were full of tears, but she couldn't say anything. Because deep down, Liam was right. Nathan just watched, without showing any regret. She wasn't disposable, Liam. She was necessary. You were the only obstacle in my way. Now, not anymore. Liam laughed again, shaking his head. Do you think it's over? Do you think you can just walk away from this without any consequences? Nathan raised an eyebrow, interested. And what do you intend to do? Attack me here, in front of everyone? Ruin your reputation even more? Liam took a deep breath. He wouldn't give Nathan that taste. Not there, not like that. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of a bigger picture. But listen carefully to what I'm saying, I'm not an easy man to take down. You think you've won, but this story isn't over yet. He turned around, without waiting for a response. Sophie called his name, but he didn't look back. He had nothing more to say to her. The Liam who entered that house was not the same one who left now. Something inside him had changed. Something in him had been destroyed. The night was cold when he left. The cold air filled his lungs, but it wasn't enough to calm him down. His chest was still heavy, his mind was still a whirlwind. He got into the car and drove aimlessly, not knowing exactly where he wanted to go. He just knew he couldn't go home. The house that was once a home was now just a place full of empty memories. The road passed before his eyes like a blur. He didn't know how long he drove, but when he finally stopped, he realized he was in front of a hotel. Something inside him gave way, and he knew this would be his first night away from everything he knew. He entered the reception, asked for a room without even paying attention to what the attendant was saying. He went up, opened the door and threw himself on the bed. The silence in the room seemed greater than any silence he had ever felt before. The emptiness weighed on him. And it was there, alone, with no one to see, that he allowed the tears to come. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the loss of something much bigger. He didn't know how to rebuild his life from there. But I knew that, somehow, I would find a way. Across town, Sophie remained at Nathan's house, sitting in a chair, unable to move. The guests had already left, dinner was over, but she couldn't get out of there. His mind was in chaos. Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed she felt, everything was wrong. Nathan approached, pouring himself another glass of whiskey. So what are you going to do now? She looked up at him, feeling an anger she hadn't expected to feel. You used me. He laughed, shaking his head. I gave you what you wanted. You just didn't realize that it also benefited me. Sophie felt her stomach drop. Suddenly, everything about her seemed dirty, wrong. She wanted to get out of there, she wanted to scream, she wanted to go back in time and do everything differently. But it was too late. She got up, grabbed her bag and started walking towards the door. Nathan didn't stop her. He just watched her. When his hand touched the doorknob, he said calmly. If you need anything, you know where to find me. She didn't respond. He just left, feeling like he was leaving behind not just a house, but the entire illusion he had lived in for the past few months. Outside, the night seemed bitterly cold. Sophie hugged herself and walked aimlessly, not knowing where to go, not knowing who she was now. Liam was right. She hadn't been special. She hadn't been loved. She had just been a piece. And now, the game was over. Liam woke up to dim light coming through the hotel curtains. The silence in the room was overwhelming. His head throbbed, too heavy to process everything at once. The betrayal, the humiliation, the fact that it had all been engineered. Nathan didn't just want his wife. He wanted to destroy it. And Sophie? Sophie fell like a pawn in that dirty game, without realizing she was being manipulated. Or maybe you noticed, and just chose to ignore it. The thought burned in his mind like a poison, corroding any trace of feeling that might still exist within him. He got up slowly, feeling the weight of a bad night's sleep. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below. Cars continued their normal flow, people walked hurriedly, without knowing that in that room, someone was watching their life fall apart. The world continued as if nothing had happened. As if your pain meant nothing. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil in his mind. He couldn't stay there forever. He couldn't hide, no matter how much he wanted to. He took out his cell phone, hesitated for a moment before unlocking the screen. Several missed calls from Sophie. Some messages. He didn't open any. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, I didn't want any more empty words. She had already said everything she needed to say the night before. And even though she hadn't said anything, her eyes had spoken for themselves. Regret mixed with despair. But what hurt most was not the betrayal itself, but the fact that she didn't choose him. Not when it mattered. He left the room, went down to the lobby, went straight past reception without saying a word. The cold morning air hit his face, bringing a bit of clarity. He walked to the car, got in and stood there, with his hands on the steering wheel, not knowing where to go. You're home. No. That place was no longer a home. His mind wandered to the office. Work, once his fortress, now seemed like a minefield. Nathan was there. The man who destroyed everything and still had the audacity to smile while doing it. Liam knew that if he walked into that company, something inside him would explode. He decided to drive aimlessly, letting his thoughts get lost on the road. But the further away he got, the more he realized there was nowhere to run. At some point, he would have to face all of this. Face Sophie. Face Nathan. Facing the reality that your life would never be the same. Sophie, on the other hand, was in a different chaos. She had spent the night awake, sitting on the sofa in the living room, hugging her legs like a lost child. The house was dark, silent, and every corner of it seemed to whisper what had happened. The cell phone was in his hand, but Liam wasn't answering it. He sent messages, tried calling countless times, but the answer was always the same, silence. The truth was brutal. She couldn't go back in time. He couldn't change what he did. I couldn't undo what Liam saw. And the worst? I didn't know what I would do from there. Part of her wanted to believe that if she explained it properly, if she said she never knew about Nathan's plans, Liam might see that she was a victim too. But another, more honest part knew that it wouldn't change anything. She was an accomplice, knowingly or not. She chose Nathan. She cheated. The sound of the door opening brought a start. She stood up immediately, her heart racing. For a moment, he thought it was Liam. That he had returned. That maybe there was still a chance. But it wasn't him. Nathan walked in as if nothing had happened, as if the night before had been just any dinner. His gaze was calm, cold, without a trace of regret. Sophie felt a lump in her throat. Everything in her now screamed for him to go away. The man who made her feel wanted, who made her believe there was something new for her outside of marriage, now seemed like a stranger. She crossed her arms, trying to create an invisible barrier between them. "What are you doing here?" Nathan smiled, as if the question were absurd. "I thought you might need some company." Sophie felt a bitter taste in her mouth. "Company? You destroyed my marriage." He raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. I thought you did it alone." The words were a slap. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her chest tighten. How stupid it was. How did you not see before what was now so clear? Nathan never cared about her. I never wanted anything more than what I had already achieved. She took a step back, her voice coming out shaky. "Go away." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, analyzing her, measuring her every reaction. Then he smiled sideways and raised his hands in a gesture of false surrender. "If that's what you want," he left, leaving a trail of silence behind him. Sophie collapsed onto the couch again, feeling the tears finally run down her face. None of it was worth it. Not only did she lose Liam, but she also lost herself. Meanwhile, Liam parked in front of the office of the lawyer he contacted the next morning. He couldn't stand still in the middle of the chaos. "I needed to resolve issues. Sign the papers. Make it clear that your marriage had ended there, that night." He entered the building without hesitation. The atmosphere was formal, silent, the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. The secretary smiled politely and indicated the room where the lawyer was waiting for him. He walked in, feeling a crushing weight on his shoulders. The woman on the other side of the table was direct. "I already had the documents ready." He looked at Liam with an understanding but professional look. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" He nodded. "Absolute." She slid the papers over to him. "Everything is here. Just sign." Liam took the pen, felt the weight of it in his fingers. His name was there, on the paper, next to Sophie's. Their marriage, which began with promises and genuine love, was now reduced to a contract about to be terminated. He signed. Across town, Sophie felt an inexplicable shiver, as if something inside her was being ripped away. The silence in the house seemed more oppressive now. The phone rang. She grabbed the device in a hurry, with a thread of hope that it was Liam. But it wasn't. She was his lawyer. The voice was calm, emotionless. "The divorce has been made official. You will receive the documents soon." Sophie didn't respond. He just hung up, letting the phone fall to the floor. She knew at that moment. There was no turning back. There were no more excuses. Liam headed to his car, taking a deep breath. The decision was made. But something inside him still burned. It couldn't end like this. Nathan would pay for everything. Liam left the lawyer's office without looking back. The divorce was signed, and now there was no more Sophie, no more marriage to repair, no more home to return to. Just the weight of a name he no longer wanted to carry and the feeling that, no matter how hard he tried to move forward, something inside him was still shattered. He walked to the car, threw the folder with papers on the passenger seat and remained there for a few moments, observing the city outside. Life continued around him, but for him, everything seemed suspended. Nothing made sense anymore. He started the car and drove aimlessly, avoiding any place that could remind him of the past. I wanted distance from everything, especially Sophie. But as his fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, one name came back to him with irritating frequency. Nathan. Sophie's betrayal hurt him, but the coldness with which Nathan set everything up was what really consumed him. It wasn't just an affair, it wasn't just a slip-up. It was a plan. A dirty and well-calculated strategy. Liam had been thrown onto the board without realizing it, and now he wondered, what did Nathan get out of it other than the satisfaction of destroying him? He parked in front of some bar. He wasn't hungry. He didn't want to talk to anyone, he just needed something to silence his thoughts. He ordered a shot of whiskey and drank it in one gulp, feeling the liquid burn his throat. But nothing was enough to erase the bitter taste he carried from the previous night. Across town, Sophie was still sitting on the couch in the house she no longer felt was hers. The curtains were closed, the room was in darkness. The phone is silent, the messages go unanswered. Liam is gone. Definitely. The marriage is over, and there is nothing left but the echo of your own choices. He heard the sound of the doorbell and was startled. For an instant, his heart quickened, a spark of hope appeared. But when he opened the door, he found Nathan, standing there as if nothing had happened. He wore an impeccable suit, his face wore that same carefree smile. "I expected a better reception," he said, entering uninvited. Sophie took a step back, feeling suffocated by his presence. "What are you doing here?" Nathan looked around the house, picked up a bottle of wine from the table and poured himself. "You don't answer my calls. I thought we could talk in person." "I don't want to talk to you." He took a sip of the wine, taking his time. "You're feeling abandoned, aren't you? Lost? Because I know Liam isn't coming back. He signed the papers without hesitation, right?" Sophie felt a lump in her throat, but she wouldn't let Nathan see her vulnerability. "You got what you wanted. There is nothing left to discuss." Nathan chuckled softly, leaning into her. "Do you really think it was just about you and Liam? This was always bigger." Sophie looked at him, feeling a shiver. "What do you mean?" Nathan turned the glass in his hands, as if considering whether it was worth revealing. Then he gave a half smile. "Liam hasn't realized it yet. But he was never just an employee. He was always a risk." "Risk to whom?" Nathan moved a little closer. "For me, for my business." Sophie felt her breathing hitch. Nathan wasn't just a powerful CEO, he was dangerous. She took a step back, realizing the truth behind the trap she fell into. "You wanted to destroy Liam because he could take you down." Nathan smiled as if he was pleased that she finally understood. "Smart. I knew deep down you would see beyond the obvious." Sophie felt butterflies in her stomach. "And me? What was I in all this?" Nathan tilted his head, assessing her. "A means to an end." The words were a blow. It was used. No matter how many wrong choices he made, he believed, at some point, that there was something genuine there. But to Nathan, she was never more than a piece on the board. Disgust rose in his throat, and his voice was firm. "Get out of here." Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish. But when you realize that Liam will never look at you the same way again, you might regret pushing me away." Sophie didn't respond. He just watched him leave, feeling a crushing weight on his chest. Liam, on the other hand, finally decided what to do. "I couldn't just accept what Nathan did and move on as if nothing had happened. There was something bigger behind that plot, and he needed to find out." The next day, he arrived at the company before work. He entered without attracting attention, heading towards Nathan's office. The room was empty. He knew he wouldn't have long before someone noticed his presence there, so he started searching the drawers, looking for something that would explain why Nathan was so interested in seeing him destroyed. That's when he found a dossier. Papers, contracts, financial transactions. And then he saw it. Nathan was involved in an illegal scheme within the company. Stock manipulation, shady transactions, embezzlement. Liam was the only piece who could have discovered this sooner, but Nathan distracted him with the betrayal, with the destruction of his personal life, ensuring he never had the chance to realize what was right before his eyes. Anger rose like a fire inside him. Nathan thought he could win this game. But Liam finally saw the entire board. He took the documents, put them in a folder and left the office. Nathan's plan was about to fall apart, and Liam would make sure to be the one to take him down. The fate of that story was not yet sealed. But one thing was certain, Nathan would pay for everything. The sun was starting to set when Liam parked the car in front of the company building. The silence inside the vehicle contrasted with the storm in his mind. The documents on the passenger seat seemed to weigh tons. It was everything he needed to destroy Nathan, everything he needed to turn the tide. For so long, he was targeted without even realizing it. Now, it was his turn to make the final move. He got out of the car and walked to the building without hesitation. Each step echoed within him as a reminder that this moment would define not only his future, but that of everyone who was involved in that dirty plot. He walked past reception without being asked, his eyes fixed on the hallway that led to Nathan's office. Nathan was sitting behind the desk, as if he had already been waiting for his arrival. His face carried the same smug smile as always, but there was something different. Perhaps a shadow of caution, a subtle trace of concern hidden behind false confidence. Liam walked in and threw the papers on the table. Nathan looked at them quickly, without showing surprise. "So, you finally found out," he said, leaning back in his chair, as if it were just a minor inconvenience. Liam crossed his arms, feeling the anger contained in every muscle in his body. "You set me up. Ruined my life, destroyed my marriage, and all this because of money?" Nathan smiled, taking one of the papers and leafing through it as if he was bored. "No money. Power. You were a risk, Liam. A risk that I could not allow to continue to grow." Liam stepped forward, his voice low but filled with fury. "Do you think you will get away with it? Do you think it will stay like this?" Nathan put down his papers and stood up, adjusting his tie. "And what exactly do you intend to do? Take this to the board? To the police? You have no idea how many are with me. Do you think taking me down is that simple?" Liam didn't blink. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Nathan was influential, he had connections, he had spent years protecting himself. But Liam had something he didn't, nothing left to lose. "You don't know me, Nathan. I'm not a man who accepts being stepped on. You took everything from me, but that means now I'm not afraid of anything anymore." Nathan laughed, but for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "You're bluffing." Liam pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "Perhaps. Or maybe I've already sent all this to the press, to the company board, to the authorities." Nathan froze for a second. His face, always so controlled, faltered. I learned something from you," Liam interrupted, his voice firm. "Anticipation." Nathan took a deep breath, trying to regain his posture. But his gaze no longer carried the same arrogance. He knew he was cornered. Liam leaned slightly across the table. "That's not a threat. It's a fact. You are finished." Nathan clenched his fists but said nothing. He knew there was no way out. Liam took the documents back, his eyes fixed on the man who tried to destroy him. "Enjoy your last days in this office." He turned and left, leaving Nathan alone, for the first time not knowing what to do. Across town, Sophie sat in the coffee shop where, years ago, she and Liam used to meet. The coffee in front of him was slowly cooling, untouched. His eyes were red, his expression blank. She no longer tried to call Liam. I already knew he wouldn't answer. He'd moved on, and now she needed to accept that. But accepting didn't make it any easier. Loneliness weighed heavily on his shoulders, and guilt seemed like a constant shadow. She looked at the door for a moment, waiting to see him enter, waiting for one last look, one last word. But I knew that wouldn't happen. He wouldn't come back. The door opened, but it wasn't Liam who entered. It was Nathan. He looked different. His face was pale, his eyes carried something she had never seen before, fear. He sat in front of her without asking permission. He broke up with me. Sophie didn't say anything. He just watched him, seeing for the first time the ruin of a man who always thought he was untouchable. Nathan ran his hand over his face, exhausted. Do you still have anything with me, Sophie? Some part of you that still wants me around. She laughed, but it wasn't a fun laugh. It was a bitter laugh. You used me. And I left. But now I see you for who you really are. Nathan looked down. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. But Sophie felt nothing but contempt. She stood up, picked up her bag, and looked at him one last time. Good luck with what's to come. He left without looking back, without feeling remorse, without feeling sorry. She finally understood that chapter was closed. Liam, on the other hand, walked through the city feeling the weight on his shoulders finally lift. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew he was free. Nathan fell. Sophie is in the past. And him? He was ready to start over. If you've made it this far, I want to know what you thought of this story. Leave your comment and tell me your opinion. Do you think Liam should have done anything different? Did Sophie deserve forgiveness? Did Nathan get the ending he deserved? I want to know what you think. And if you like this type of story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Remember, betrayal is never a path without consequences. Here, we don't romanticize it. Until next time.